Hey everyone, and welcome to another devlog video for the NPC Manager system. I'm super excited to show you guys the upcoming changes to the Spline path that I've been working on for the past week or so. If you've been following up with the videos, you know that I've been updating the NPC Manager system alongside the procedural city generator with the goal that once both updates go out, those assets are going to integrate way easier than they do now. Right now it's fairly manual, so a lot of the changes that I'm doing on the NPC Manager system side are going to obviously improve the asset, but also make it a lot easier to add NPCs to your cities. So this time I wanted to address the spline path code that I had for the system. That's what you actually have now. Very similar to what you guys have in ABK as well. And you can see here, the basic idea is we have a spline path and you have different waypoints at each spline point. And if I click on simulate here, what you'll see is that we have an NPC that'll follow the spline point and stop for a certain amount of time on each waypoint. And that's basically the, what you guys have right now. That's the basic behavior of the path. It's very limited though, because you can only assign one path, and the original code had a specific time that the NPC would stop at each waypoint. So that's one of the first things I wanted to address, is to make this a lot more flexible. So the first thing I did, as you can notice here, is I added a mesh, and this is just to visualize the path. Makes it a lot easier. Otherwise you have to without this, you have to actually select it so the spline point shows up. So this is very minor, but just makes it a lot easier. You can see if I zoom out here, we'll show you in a second. It's a lot easier to see the paths now without having to select it. So the first thing I did is I actually moved the stop time or the delay of each individual waypoint, instead of on the NPC, to the actual waypoint. That makes a lot of sense. That means that if you select a specific waypoint, like I'm going to select this one here, and you scroll down, now you'll see that you have a wait time range, and you can select by default is between 2 and 4 seconds. So we can say something like, okay, actually I want this to be 10 seconds exactly. So as the NPC is going along its path, say that you have like a specific monument or asset here that you want the NPC to kind of sit around and watch. Think about this also combining it with the new bark system. Maybe you have something that you want the NPC to stay around and bark about, right? Make some comments about an object. Now you can have a specific path. And now with this one specifically, if I click on play, notice that it'll stay here between 2 and 4 seconds. But then when it comes here, it'll actually stay 10 seconds. So the delay is way longer, and then the other ones are default. So that's the first thing that adds a little bit more flexibility. You see he's still waiting, and now he's going. Before, it was a single value, and it was attached to the NPC controller itself. So right there you have a lot more. I also added the ability to remove waypoints completely, right? So maybe you want the NPC to just walk. Right, again, this is thinking about PCG. Maybe you want your NPC to walk along a sidewalk and you don't want him to stop necessarily. So now I can just go ahead and delete the waypoints, and if I click play, I'm going to select the path again here, then the NPC will just go along the path. That actually wasn't possible before. You needed to have a waypoint. So I had to basically rewrite the way I'm doing the logic here. But now the NPC will simply follow the spline. If there are no waypoints, it'll just keep going. And you can see in this case, it's not looped. It's just going back and forth. If there is a waypoint, it'll stop. So the next logical conclusion was, hey, what if I have waypoints in select spline points instead of all the time, right? Before, every single spline point had a waypoint, but now what I can do is, you can see here that I can scroll down and say populate waypoint map. I click on that, and if I go to the waypoint setup, now you see that because we have 5 spline points, by default every spline point will receive a waypoint. But maybe I don't want that. Maybe I want spline points specific to have waypoints. So I say, okay, I don't want waypoints at the beginning or end of the spline. I just want 2 waypoints to spawn at index 1 and index 3. And now when I go to place waypoints, notice that we only have these 2. Again, this is giving a lot more flexibility. And now when I click play, well, you can see he'll stop here at the 2nd and he'll stop here at the 4th. Even though you can't see it, but you can see that now we have that option. And I'm going to make them visible here, as you can see. So now you have individual waypoints or no waypoints at all. Each waypoint has its own wait time. That gives you a lot more flexibility. And then other thing I did is I added a offset, a path offset. And you can see here that each path has an offset range. And again, this is similar to think about this spline point as an actual road in PCG. Say that you wanted to match this path to an actual road, but you don't want the NPCs to actually be walking on the road. You want them to be on the sidewalk. So then you have to offset the path by a certain amount. And in this case, X and Y mean min and max. So you can say something like, I want the NPC to go between 250 to 400, and it'll pick a random one, which is going to be to the right. And then when you click play, actually, you know what? Let me make the path visible, so it's a lot easier to see. Path options here. And I'm going to deselect path hidden. That way you can still see the yellow mesh. Notice now that the NPC is still going along the path, but it has an offset of between 250 and 400. And then when it goes back, it'll keep the same offset, but on the opposite side of the road. So in this case, I'm assuming people go on the right side of the road. You know, I live in the US, so that's kind of the assumption there. And then that's the way it works. So you have that offset there. Notice that I added these triggers, and these are the triggers that are going to determine or tell the NPC when he actually reached the end of the path. So what I need to do here is increase the scale. I'm going to make this like 20. You can see now, and 20. That way, when the NPC reaches the end, he'll actually go back. So if I grab this guy and I duplicate him, and I'm going to make the range of the offset bigger, just to make a point, like 600 or something. You can see that each NPC has a slightly different offset, but they're still respecting the the path. They're just kind of stopping there. So you can see here that now you can have multiple NPCs following the same path, but each one can have a slightly different offset. So again, think about they're going on the sidewalk, and not everybody walks on the sidewalk on a straight line, right? People just go in a range on the sidewalk. And you can do the same thing on the left, by the way. So yeah, so those are the main things. I also wanted to add connected paths. That's the example that I have here. And I'm not going to show you the setup because it does take a little bit of time, but I'm just going to drive this guy here. So, and I'm going to change his path ID to path 2. So then he actually uses these. But what you can see here is you have several paths, like path 1, path 2, 3, 4, 5. And each path now has the ability to trace for its neighbors. That's the new function here. And each path right now has 2 neighbors. Neighbor 1, which is at the beginning, and neighbor 2, which is at the end. You can see that each one holds a reference to its neighbors. That way, implicitly, you're creating a connected map. If you're in path 1 and you get to the end, then the end means that the neighbor is path 2. So then the NPC at that point can continue and go to path 2. And then path 2 says, hey, if you reach the end, my neighbor number 2 is path 3. And then the NPC can kind of go that way. So right now, it's very primitive, but it's just for testing purposes. What I've done is I've added what I call, under the path section, a path route. And these values are going to be hidden. They're just made public right now for testing purposes. But the path route is something that I like to include in the profile itself when I actually, finish implementing it. So you can have here as a task list, a standard task. You can have something like follow nearby path, and maybe you can have an actual path route included here. So it'll be grabbed from the profile. It'll be populated here. But the point is, you can see that there's a path that we're telling the NPC to follow. We're saying path 1, 2, 5, and 4. And the reason I said 5 and 4 is because I want him to detour. So actually, let's change it just to show just the general. Instead of 5, we're going to make this 3. So we're saying the path is going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I am going to make his speed a little bit faster, so we're not kind of waiting here. So we're going to walk speed. Let's make it like 600, between 600 and 800, just to make it a little bit faster. And now if I click play, notice that the NPC starts here, which is path 1, and when it reaches the end, it'll then connect to path 2. Each path has a different offset, which the NPC is respecting, and if I wanted to add, you see that that's a little bug I have to fix there. But you can see that the NPC is now following different paths, and when he gets to the end, it goes to the next path based on his route. Each path can have independent waypoints with their own random range for the NPC to stop, and each path has their own offset. So if you have a main road that you're following, you obviously want the offset to be bigger because the sidewalk is farther from the street compared to like a minor road. So that's kind of the idea, right? Each street will have one of these paths if you want the NPC to walk around them with their own different offsets, and then you can have your own waypoints that would simplify, like maybe in front of a building or a monument, and then at that point you can use the bark system to have the NPCs say something about that. And of course, they'll only say it on player proximity, so it's still very efficient. So if you're walking around your city, maybe there's like a big monument in your city, and you're gonna have your NPC specifically stop there and wait, and when the player goes by, then they'll hear the bark about that monument. Yeah, and you notice here that some paths are backwards, so that's another thing that I had to add. So here it's like from beginning to end, from beginning to end, from beginning to end, but this one is separate. This one is beginning is at the end, quote unquote, end of the logical path, and the end is at the beginning. So that's another thing that I had to rework, is that no matter which direction in the spline you're going, we still want the NPC to follow normally. Last thing that I'll show you here is going back to the path, is if I, instead of number 3, I say number 5, which is this middle path here, you'll notice that the same thing happens, except that you can put any order you want, right? As soon as this guy gets here, he's gonna take this detour, think about like a separate street, come here, and then continue on his path. There you go. So now we have the ability to give each NPC a specific path, which of course right now is manual. But think about, these are all the building blocks that I need to eventually have what I want, is a navigation manager, quote unquote, new blueprint that will then give each NPC a separate path based on a location. So maybe an NPC has a goal to go to the store, and it'll go and grab a path from this blueprint that will calculate the best path from the NPC's location to his target location based on the splines. The NPC will then receive the proper path, and then the NPC can go there. Another thing, and I haven't implemented this, but you see here, is Now that I have each spline having neighbors, what if I added an option for the NPCs to follow a random path? So the NPC will start here, will go here, and then will come here. But then when it gets to this junction, it'll pick a random path. Do you want to go this way or that way? Right, based on how many streets are overlapping. So that's another change that I need to add. But you can see how all of these possibilities start appearing once you have the basic fundamental feature of, hey, the NPC can follow a spline route, which multiple paths. So that's what I'm thinking. The next one I want to add is having the option of each road to have multiple neighbors per end instead of just one, and then have an option for the NPC to just use random paths. So you can see this is laid out as like a city block, and the goal would be to have NPCs just follow random paths along. That itself would make it a lot more believable for your city. And then after that, the next step would be, again, having a proper manager, quote unquote, that would help the NPC have logical paths based on an end goal. If I can eventually have that, then we would definitely have a much more interactive city, because then you could have a full profile for each NPC with a routine to go in a specific location on the city, and they would actually follow the path. So they won't be crossing in the middle of the street, or they won't be going through buildings. They would actually follow the path that you're aligning to. So yeah, that is pretty much it, guys. I basically rewrote the whole task for paths, but I wanted to make sure that I kept the same functionality. So if you're using NPC Manager right now and you like the current functionality of stopping on every single waypoint, you can still do that. I didn't want to break that for you guys, but I'm basically expanding it way more, because the spline crowds, which is what I showed last time, isn't really cutting it. I want the full-blown NPC Manager to work on paths. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Hopefully you like where this is going. Again, I haven't decided exactly how much more I'll add. This update started as something fairly small, and the more I think about it and the more I update NPC Manager and PCG, the more I'm thinking of ways of making this integration easier. So if you have any ideas of things that I can do to make this work better on a city, or any other requests for features, please do let me know in the comments below. If you haven't, make sure you join our Discord server. I'm a lot more active there. I don't have a lot of time to record these videos, so this is going to be more sporadic. But if you want to ask me a question, interact with me, or just with the other members of the community, Discord is great for that. So yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you in the next video.